Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Majority Show, coming to you live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. On YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm here today on Scotland's number one politics chat with my co-hosts, Mark Zegveldt and Mary Devlin.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
What do you have for us tonight, Mary?
Well, tonight I'm going to be discussing how Patrick Harvey's rent controls have caused rents to rise faster in Scotland than anywhere else in the UK.
And Mark, what have you got for us?
I'm going to be speaking about the police hate bill.
Yes,
and how it affects free speech in Scotland.
Humza's thought police. And we'll all be talking about next week's Rutherglen election and last night's debate, as well as some Twitter posts that we did over the past few days. Quite interesting results there.
And of course, we have Zoomer of the Week.
Right, so all that and much more will be coming your way in just a few seconds. Right, welcome back to Scotland's number one politics and chat from an anti-nationalist perspective. Our aim is a better Scotland without nationalism, without the toxic nationalism that is strangling Scotland's potential. As usual, huge thanks to our friends at UK Union Voice and United Against Separation Facebook pages, where many of you are watching from tonight. I'm here with Mary and Mark. Mark hasn't been on the show for a little while. What have you been up to?
I've been doing quite a few of the Twitter spaces. We've had some really good guests on recently. MSP Liz Smith.
Okay.
And yes. Thursday night we've got Murdo Fraser coming on. So a lot more good. Politicians are starting to realise that these spaces are a pretty good idea to speak to the general public.
And how long typically does a space last for?
It depends. I normally do it from 8 till 11, but sometimes the guests need to go a bit earlier. So usually about a couple of hours when I've got a guest on. And
how many viewers, or well, it's not really viewers, listeners do you have on each space? Roughly?
We can go up to about a couple of 100 to 300 people live, and then listening to the recordings, over 1,000. The best one we've had is 2,500.
That's pretty good.
That listened in. So yeah, they're getting better. They're starting to a lot more people listening to them.
Yeah. I mean, I think when you think about it from a town hall perspective, so politicians, when they wanted to speak to people, a lot of the time they maybe had if they were lucky, a town hall meeting or just a little meeting somewhere. So being able to reach over 2,000 people at a time, it's really good for them, isn't it?
Yeah, and they're really well run, and not just from me. There's a lot of people that host them now, and they're very popular. There's no bad feeling inside them. They're controlled well. There's a lot of really interesting questions, people, and there's not just from one side. We get a lot of nationalists coming on them as well, and it's all really good debate.
That's one thing I did notice
without
about
the nastiness.
Well, that's good, and long may that continue. Anyway, tune in tomorrow to Mark's Twitter space, well, X, I suppose you call it now, where we'll have Murdo Fraser, MSP, as a guest. Maybe I might put my oar in there a little bit. Okay, so what have we got here?
Well, a lot of people are already saying hello from wet and windy wherever.
Yes.
So we know it's very stormy out there tonight, and we're very glad that you have joined us for a cozy chat here on the Majority Show.
That is good. Yes, thank you very much. Please, if you can, share and care. Wherever you are, please like, share, subscribe, comment, tell friends all about us, and extend our reach with the click of a button.
And as usual, I'll be handling all your comments tonight, so please make them short, snappy, and fun, and we'll get as many up on the screen as we can. Thank you.
Right, okay, let's talk about today. We're back in just a second. Okay, what have we got? So, got into the debate in Rutherglen in a minute, but this week we ran some super unscientific polls on our Twitter or X page. Isn't it so annoying? We have to say that all the time at the moment. Just to leave it alone as Twitter. But anyway, so the first one here, first question for you both, if you haven't seen them already, or for the people out there, is who do you think is most responsible for the SNP's decline? Would that be Nicola Sturgeon, Humza Yousaf, or Lorna, Slater, and Patrick Harvey together? And not long for the reveal. Here it comes. Okay, the winner was Nicola Sturgeon by a mile.
That's who I voted for.
Right, okay, very good. With 74.6% of the vote. Now, this, of course, is a poll of the majority's followers. So it gives that's the result, right? It's not a poll of the general population. But interestingly, I think here, Humza Yousaf actually doesn't have very much poll result at all. What do you think of that, Mark?
I think it's a mixture of a few things. I think it's obviously the police investigation with Nicola Sturgeon, but I do think it's the coalition with the Greens have damaged them considerably. I think it's doing irreparable damage to the SNP, in my opinion.
In fact, I think that's what the poll basically says. It says, look, these are the two reasons. Nicola Sturgeon and Lorna Slater, she brought them in there into power, and we've seen the results of that with the GRR, DRS, rents, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit later, and a whole bunch of failed policies that have basically, and of course, the most important one, perhaps, in fact, that's what we'll talk about next. The next poll, which is what of all these policies, which one is why is the SNP losing support? So it could be lack of progress in Indy, trans issues, Green failures, or Sturgeon's legal issues. And have a think about that for a second. And we have big reveal. All right. So the big reason why our followers think the SNP is losing support is primarily trans issues. In fact, I think basically Nicola Sturgeon going up and putting Isla Bryson into a female prison was a huge mistake on her part. I think many people would agree with that there. But interestingly, we have lack of progress in India, 16%. But if we contrast that, if I scroll down here, you can see, contrast that with someone who did a nationalist poll. In fact, that's inspired. Why should the SNP lose Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election? Betrayal of independence is their big thing.
Interesting.
So they see it slightly differently in that case.
But betrayal of women was still a big issue. Yes,
that's true. Well, they put it in more perhaps bigger terms there. Question is then, can Rutherglen, can anything be done about it? And the fight starts, of course, in Rutherglen. Actually, first of all, before that, but if you prefer actual real polling, this week's YouGov poll has Scottish independence at 39%. So, and we should see a drop. I mean, I'm predicting a drop in those numbers after Rutherglen by-election, if Labour win, which seems likely. So, let's go on, and we will talk about this Rutherglen by-election and the debate that happened last night. We saw it was the first time we've really seen the main candidates going at each other. We had SNP's Kate Loudon, Labour's Michael Shanks, and Thomas Kerr from the Scottish Conservatives. I don't know how many of you watched the format. I've got a little clip that I'll show later, but the basic idea was that the candidates kind of grilled each other, but it was a very short, 2 minutes each, so there was no real, I didn't think there was any real debate. Did you watch it, Mark?
I watched some of it, and I agree it was not great a debate at all, but
they only got a couple of minutes each.
Kate Loudon was absolutely terrible.
Yes,
absolutely terrible.
Definitely.
What was your impression of her, Mark?
I think she's very naive. She's pretty unprofessional. I think it was just I thought it was quite shocking, her attack mode. It was very shouty.
Yeah.
And I thought and according to what I've seen today, nobody was impressed with her performance. I thought Stephen Kerr actually won the debate.
Thomas
Kerr.
I thought he was pretty good on it. I thought he stick to the subject. He was calm. He was, I dare say, professional. But
yeah, let's go. Let's have a look at. Let's just show a little bit here of Katie and Thomas Kerr. This will give you a flavour. The whole thing was pretty much like this.
Just to clarify for voters, in Rutherglen and Hamilton West, do you support the SNP bringing in a congestion charge in Glasgow City Council that you know will hammer?
You're Glasgow City Councillor, so this is a matter for you. I'm a South Lanarkshire councillor.
But do you agree with it? You get me to ask your questions in a minute. I'm asking you, do you agree with it?
West.
Do you agree there should be a congestion charge?
What you're doing is you're trying to ask a gotcha question, and you have the cheek to ask a question for me when the Tories have crashed
do you agree with it or do you not agree with it?
You have pursued a hard
let's move on to another point.
People in our area,
let's move on to another point.
hundreds of millions of pounds.
The congestion charge is one thing, the low emissions is another thing. Both of these policies that are in Glasgow City Council are hurting families across Rutherglen and Hamilton West who are coming into the city. Michael had already mentioned the council tax rise. You didn't clarify your position. Do you support the rises? Yes or no?
I'll tell you what's hurting families
do you support it, yes or no?
The canvas, like the
I'm not interested in your pre-prepared statement. I'm asking, do you support it, yes or no?
Pardon?
Do you support the council tax rises, yes or no?
I support a conversation on this because I am in favour of fair taxation. What I'm not in favour of.
Right, exactly as is said there. Somewhat, maybe it's our audio, but there was it's hard in the ears. Let's put it that way.
I thought she sounded really scrappy. I thought she sounded like a woman like fighting with another woman over the fence about the kids or something like that. The finger wagging and I'll tell you what.
Well, she answered. She like you say, the format was they were asked to ask them questions, each asking questions. And she comes out with the line of, how dare you ask me a question?
Right.
I thought that was the whole format. But that's the kind of attitude and the ignorance you get from the SNP. How dare you ask me a question?
Yes. Well,
the
other thing was she didn't.
From Sturgeon.
She didn't even answer the questions. Thomas asked her twice for 2 yes/no answers, and she could have just said, "Yeah." I don't understand why she didn't, but I think perhaps that shows inexperience to some extent that she can't just say a straight answer. And I'll come back to that in a minute, also with some of the other questions that were there. But I think like. Probably with most viewers, that the other two candidates had some kind of gravitas. They felt as though they could be in the Parliament, and they were measured and controlled. And that Loudon seemed to me, well, Mary's, I think she'd be fine maybe in a council or something that's maybe low grade. A small town meeting, whatever, and fair enough, but didn't have that extra level of maybe professionalism, gravitas, skill. I mean, a lot of many things.
Professionalism. She lacked professionalism.
And okay, so talking about Thomas, he is a working class Tory. I think one thing that was interesting about him was that he gave quite a good defence of, let's put it this way, he was prepared to defend Rishi Sunak. And this is a thing we actually don't see very often. I was kind of surprised. Most of the news that I read, certainly, and certainly meant much of the conservative press, is very negative on anything to do with Rishi Sunak, it seems to me. So I was quite surprised to see him do that. He basically said that Sunak had reduced energy prices, reduced inflation, promoted growth, and he said that 2 or 3 times. And I felt that it actually came across quite well, that he was prepared to stick with he had a plan and he stuck with it, and it seemed quite reasonable, I think.
Yeah. He didn't fall for the trap of getting involved in a slagging match with Katie Loudon, where she was pointing fingers, and you could see with her hands she was looking for, like a slagging match. But he didn't get involved in that. He just calmly said, answer the question that I've given you, please. And then, he repeated the question and repeated the question. and it made her look even, less polished.
Yes.
And because she didn't know the answer, or she wouldn't answer it, because and the reason I think she wouldn't answer, and she was getting so annoyed, was because of her previous comments a few days ago, where she said, "I'll put the party first, I'll put the SNP first," and then people jumped on, well, no, you're supposed to put your constituents first.
Right.
And I think that them comments riled her.
Right, and so she didn't know how to defend them.
So
but
she didn't know how to
she
defend
certainly should
that.
have been briefed. It seems that she wasn't briefed. I did get the feeling very much that both Thomas and Michael had been briefed well, and had maybe done some practice and preparation and
Done
so
her
on.
homework.
Yeah, it seemed like that in that sense. I mean, I'll have to say though, for Thomas, he has been pulled down by things that are not necessarily topics of discussion. Tory party is kind of in disarray anyway. The biggest issue facing that's of interest to Tory voters is immigration and stopping the boats, and that's something that he, as a local MP, has no control over. But it's the thing that will determine, I think, really the fortunes of the. I mean, Sunak can talk as much as he likes about. Oh yeah, I got what's it called? Got inflation down and energy prices down. But people, that's not the hot button issue for most Conservatives, I think. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I think immigration is going to play a huge part in the next general election. I think. And I think it's where the Conservatives are going to fail on, because they promised, was it 4 years ago, to stop the boats and control immigration, and I think I do have some sympathy for them in a way, because it's not just been stopped. They wanted to put the immigration bill through, but it's been held up and held up and held up. The House of Lords sent it back a couple of times. I think,
it's a difficult issue, isn't it?
Well,
Yeah,
it's not
it
so like
is,
that, but I
it
think they
is.
need more. I think what Conservatives want is political willpower. We're going to get this done. It's going to happen, and it always seems a bit on the defensive and that thing. But anyway, that's a wider issue. It's kind of a little bit out of our scope. The other thing,
Well, Rita says it's more important in England than it is in Scotland.
Yes. Well, Scotland doesn't have much immigration, but it is going to be an issue. One issue that is important, perhaps, to Scots or to the north of England, certainly, is HS2, and there's all that going on there, and the so-called levelling up agenda, which if Sunak drops HS2, whether you like project or not, then that will have serious consequences as well for their support, for any support they would have in the north and in Scotland. Now,
I just wanted to say one thing about Thomas. I think he was very much trying to emphasise that he's a working class guy from the East End of Glasgow, and I think that worked for him. He didn't come across as a toffee-nosed Tory.
Right. Well, no, I think certainly there are toffee-nosed Tories, but more and more there are working class let's say not necessarily working class, but people with a working class background and who have
if he had a more middle class accent and so on, then I think they would probably try to attack him on that.
Yeah, he's a very likable character, and I think he's done good things in the Glasgow Council, and it's just a pity that he's in there. But perhaps the thing is, he gets some exposure. People see him like us. We see him actually talking, debating, going, "Oh, he's all right." Maybe he can do something else as well. Now on to Michael Shanks. I thought he also was seemed very credible candidate. But the format didn't really give a way for us to get into any depth on the issues and the thinking behind them. This was the big problem I had. For example, what does he think of Brexit now? He was famously left the party because of Brexit. Now he's back, and then now Keir Starmer says, "Okay, we're not going to go back and go through Brexit again." But what does he think of that? We didn't really get to that point. And the same thing with the 2-child cap. It's the same thing. He doesn't like that. But what I would like to know in these debates, not so much, this one was a bit like, flip-flop, I'm better than you, or our party's better than you. What about, Westminster's fault? All that. It's not. I think what voters want to see is, what's your thinking behind this? thing, right? You know, what is your thinking behind the 2-child cap, or do you have an alternative, or do you realise it's not that good perhaps for some people, or whatever? You know, get into the nuances of it a little bit more.
Well, there wasn't much time for that.
No, but I know, but that's the thing. I think they need a bit more time. That Mark, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think. See, with the Labour candidate, with Labour, they're so far in front in the polls. If you know, he has to be careful on what he says, because he can only lose it rather than win it, because he is that so far ahead. Right. So you know, he's probably been told don't be so controversial.
Well,
you know, stick to, you know, because you can only lose it. You can't. You know, he's so far ahead by all estimations. He's that far ahead.
That does make sense.
He can only lose it. You know, if he says something that's too controversial or goes against the party,
right,
that could hurt him, rather than, because he did it initially, just before the campaign fully got going. He did make comments about Starmer and Westminster,
yes.
And he said, "I'm not with them. They're not. You know, I don't always stick with them, and you know, we're a different party." And I think he got he got a grilling on it, because. And it lost him some votes, especially about the GRR, when he was questioned about that.
I actually gave quite a reasonable answer about that, but again, it was deliberately vague, I think. And I mean, okay, that's the skill of politics to some extent, right? So,
well, I thought it was quite likable, but to be honest, I'm not that clear on what Labour's policies are at the moment. So when he kept saying we've made it clear all the time, I was a bit confused.
Yes.
I think he has to stop saying that, and he has to make sure that people do understand his stance on issues before next Thursday.
I think Thomas had a good line, which was, "You've more flip-flops than Blackpool Beach." But I don't mind if a politician flip-flops if it results in a better policy.
Yeah.
So I think
especially
it's fair.
If starting to listen.
Right, I think so. I think if Starmer does say, you know, okay, well, we looked at this GRR thing. Oh no, that's, you know, it's a bit of a minefield, and we want to take our time and work on it. Okay, fair enough. Right, but I think the Shanks was a little bit like, oh no, you know, worried about that, and so it's like, just, you know, say, you know, change your mind. It's not such a big issue. Anyway, right, another poll we ran, the majority of our followers think the SNP will lose the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election by more than 20%, which would be an incredible result. However, only a 5% swing. I think it's difficult how you say the swing is. They are 4% in the SNP are 4% in the lead, so but technically a 5% swing is needed. However, this is something perhaps David would talk about: the need for tactical voting.
Anyway, I think David's going to talk about that in another show,
right? Because it's extremely important for our purposes as anti-nationalists for Labour to win this election by a good amount. It will show that there's no electoral path forward for the SNP. It's all very well saying, you know, we're going to get a referendum, we're going to get a de facto referendum with all these seats and all this, but when electoral reality comes, and with any luck that will come next Thursday, I think is the thing, then they can't say that anymore, because of, you know, the dreams. It's one thing to have a dream. It's another thing for it to hit the brick wall of reality. So we would hope that after that many disillusioned SNP will move back to Labour. Of course, it has issues of its own, but it will be good for our overall purpose, getting back to party politics. Mary, you have something to say there? Are we just yawning?
No, sorry.
Right. Okay. We will know the result in just over a week from now, and we will have perhaps have a special short programme to discuss the results. Anyway, yes, and Anne says that Conservatives won Girvan. That was a very good result for them, in fact. And
I think it's going to be very interesting.
Niall, the debate was embarrassing. Let's move on. Mary, you're going to talk next about the drug consumption rooms. Consumption be done about the rooms, as the joke goes. Okay, right. Moving on.
Well, just a quick bit of news this week. Everyone will have seen that if you buy illegal drugs in Glasgow, you can now go somewhere to use them safely. A pilot scheme for the UK's first safe consumption room has been approved for the East End of Glasgow at a cost of £2.3 million per year for staff and facilities to allow users to take their own illegal drugs under medical supervision. And it's hoped that the drug fix rooms will help reduce the number of drug deaths in Scotland. Now, again, instead of helping addicts get help and on a path to recovery, all this money is going to be spent on one location in Scotland where addicts can shoot up illegal drugs. And by the way, there is no such thing as safe drug consumption.
Right.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it's an absolute shocking idea, personally. I really do. I struggle to understand the thinking on this. You cut the SNP have cut the rehabs centres budget year on year, yet they find money for a consumption room. It's not going to fix the problem. It really isn't. It's not going to fix it. And a consumption room on its own is without any of the the extra help that's needed, is just it's gonna make the problem worse, in my opinion. I think there's a lot of answers needed on these consumption rooms. Who's going to staff them? Who's going to
you need security at them as well.
Yeah, yes. Security. What happens? Someone asked me about this in one of the spaces when we did about this. Say somebody dies of a drug overdose or anything in one of the consumption rooms. Who's responsible?
Yeah.
Who's going to be held responsible for it?
Yep.
I think there's more questions than we're getting answers on this, and I just don't think it's a good idea. They tried it they've done it in Portugal and other countries, but it hasn't. It's ultimately you're seeing now in Portugal the drug problems has risen, has gone up since they decriminalised it, and I think America, some states in America who have the consumption rooms have found that I just don't think it's a good. Personally, I think they need to put more money into rehab centres. Listen to people like Anne-Marie Ward, who knows what she's talking about,
and
get
Colin
these
McGowan.
People involved to come up to have a brain session and try and come up with some kind of answers on why Scotland's doing so badly, and come up with some kind of a plan and go from there. They're not listening to the experts on this. They're just not listening to the experts. And I think it'll be another badly thought out idea, just looking for a headline again. And then when they start opening, they'll just...
I don't understand why it costs £2.3 million to run this place, which just looks like a couple of rooms in the East End of Glasgow. And I also wonder, I mean, if you're an addict, right, and you're getting your drugs in, say, Central Station or near there or whatever, then are you going to walk all the way over to the barras, right, to get this, to sit in this kind of sterile room, which I've got this image of here, sterile kind of room to take your drugs? I mean, I was talking to Mary about this before the show. Wouldn't it be better just to have, I don't know, maybe an app or something? This is just blue sky thinking, but just to say, okay, here's an app. Would addicts say, all right, I've just taken my dose somewhere, and then if people on a motorbike or something can go and check up on them, whatever, later or something. I don't know. There's other solutions to this problem that don't involve spending this money on this particular issue, I think. And it seems, as you say, Mark, seems like a lot of virtue signalling and getting jobs for people in the 2.3 million. That's, I don't know how many jobs that is in this place for the loyal party followers.
But another issue that was brought up by an ex-drug user who said drug users don't tend to want to go out and go to places. They generally take the drugs at home or as close as to home as possible.
Yeah, you get some kind of crack place somewhere.
Yeah, so
Once you take it, you just want to like lie back and relax or whatever, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to go then and catch a bus, or...
That's it. You know, to go out and catch a bus and then, take your drugs and then come back. No, they want to stay in their own homes or close to their own homes.
Yes.
Or a friend's house or somewhere. I wonder if they've actually done any research whatsoever on how many people are within a reasonable distance from the room that might actually use it. I mean, if it was right next door to your house, then possibly you might go there. I don't even know if they would even go somewhere right next to their house. So how many of them do you think are in that vicinity?
But your point, Mary, is that it doesn't matter because they're going to just massage the results in the end anyway, right?
Yeah, well, that's what they've been doing with the minimum unit pricing for alcohol.
Well.
The civil servants have been helping the Scottish government just to come up with whatever numbers suits them. And that's exactly what they're going to do with this too.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the thing. I mean, talk about safe consumption room. It's like, well, I mean, what about other drugs as well? If you're going to a party or something like that, or party drugs, whatever, are they safe? No, you still get arrested for them. What's the sense in that type of thing? Anyway, talking about Mary, you want to introduce this wee clip?
I think we're just about to show a clip of Colin McGowan talking about the minimum unit pricing for alcohol.
Yes.
And this is what's going to happen with these safe consumption rooms as well.
Listen, the harsh reality is alcoholics or problem drinkers will always find a means to get hold of what they believe they need, alcohol or whatever. It's that simple. Alcoholic or drug addicts will always find a way to feed their addiction. Remember, an alcoholic is a family member. Alcoholics and drug addiction are both family diseases. In all probability, minimum unit pricing is more likely to take the food out of the mouth of an alcoholic's children or take the clothes off the back of an alcoholic children's back than have any meaningful reduction in quantity consumed. For anyone to believe that minimum unit pricing is saving lives in this country is, in my opinion, at best delusional and at worst simply a politician marking time until their replacement arrives and commissions yet another report. And while we wait for that report or any other reports, the families of alcoholics and drug addicts continue to arrange the funerals of their loved ones. In a country that point blank refuses to address the lack of publicly funded rehab beds, they point blank refuse.
Strong words there from Colin McGowan, who is the head of the Blameless charity, which seeks to look after the children and family members who are affected by addiction. And he's had a lot of trouble trying to get rehab spaces built. In fact,
well, he actually has a space.
Yes,
and he wanted to get funding to put in quite a large number of beds that would have been great.
Yeah, and it would have cost. It would have cost. I think it was 6 million or something was the budget. So they could have got a whole load of beds out there for this thing instead. But of course, they choose this.
The Scottish government didn't engage with them at all.
The SNP cut the funding for rehab beds. They've cut the number of beds.
Yes,
and they've cut the funding for it. So that I really don't think they're serious about the problem. They really don't. They're either not serious about the problem, or they're not listening to the right people.
Yes. Okay, moving on from that. It was a good segment there, Mary. Thank you. We need your help. Huge thank you to everyone who donates to keep the show going, and big thank you to Rita. Thank you for your donation earlier today. If you're watching the show on YouTube, and you can put in a super thanks or a super sticker donation, just click the button and that should all work for you. If you're not on YouTube, please go to the Majorities site where you can pledge a monthly or one-time donation.
Yes, so for all of you who enjoy the show, but you're maybe not regular donors, we really need your help to keep the show going. We do have monthly costs for software and equipment and other things, keeping the lights on.
Yes.
And our donations start from only £2 a month. So anything you can donate really helps to keep us going, keeps the lights on. Thank you to those people who have already made donations.
That's great. Thank you. Next up, Mark is going to talk about police and hate crimes. Be back in just a second. Right, Mark, there you go.
Yeah, the police hate crime bill. Really don't know. We could do a whole show on this on its
Yeah,
own,
we definitely
because I
could.
think it's one of the most dangerous policies this government's come up with in my lifetime. It really is. It's a shocking bill. I really don't know how it's going to be policed. They're now training officers for it to come live next year. The training officers, we've now come down from 17,234 officers to 16,600. That's a 3.7% reduction in police officers. They're cutting another 800 by April of next year. If the budget stays as it is, they'll lose a further 2,000 officers within the next 4 years.
Really? Wow.
These are statistics I found out. Now,
Well,
they
saying
now
that the
want
Scottish
police
government is
officers-
cutting 1.1 billion from the police budget by 2026.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, and they now want to police what people say, hurty words, as I say. You know,
Yes.
I think they've set up a division for it, haven't
Yes,
they?
they've
that
set
was
up
the thing.
an extra division while losing all these officers that can't cope anyway. We've got the police saying we can't run a full service to the public. We're going to have to minimalise crime. If you've no CTV in your garden, we won't come out to look at.
Yes,
if you get something robbed from your garden, we're getting. We don't know. People have been actually saying to me, when this goes live, if I say something on Twitter, am I going to get in trouble for this?
Well, probably.
You know,
Yeah.
You can.
What kind of what words are hurtful?
Well, that's
how can they police this?
That's the main issue with it. I mean, the big issue here is who decides. I mean, usually if you make a law, there's a clear line of where you break the law, and then the consequences come from that. Murder somebody, okay, you go to jail, so on. Steal something, whatever. But in this one, because language is vague and language is dependent in context and means different things to different people, then it just sets up a situation where the police or the politicians can become the judge, jury, and executioner of whatever language you use, and that depends on their political viewpoint. You know, I mean, we talk a lot about misgendering and so on, but there's more subtle things than that. I'll give you an example. If you remember a few years ago, the guy is called Count Dankula, had the dog that did the Nazi salute, and this was before this legislation was in, but basically he went up. I watched a whole podcast about it the other day, and he went up to the judge. Basically, it was one single judge, and that judge said he just thought it was offensive, and that was it. So basically, he said he had to go to jail and a fine and all this type of stuff, and so on. So the question is, this vagueness, it just gives power to people, to the government and to other people, away from the individual. Of course,
I honestly think it shuts down debate.
Yeah, and that's the other part, self-censorship as well.
It shuts down debate. It actually even shuts down, and I do believe the press are even worried about this, because they can write things, and will they be judged as causing a crime if somebody reports them? It really is, and I think it infringes on freedom of speech.
Of course it does. Of course, that's the point of it.
Anything can be considered. If you're debating and you're getting, people get passionate about debating and about issues. Sometimes you may say the wrong thing while you debate, while you're passionate,
Yes.
while you're debating about it, and then someone can go to the police and say, "Well, they've said this."
Right. And the police, I mean, another thing is, it's worse if the police are involved. I'll give you an example that we were doing here. The Scots, the Scottish government's always tried to put the Scots force the Scots language down our throats, right? And what if they said that saying Scots isn't a language, it's hate speech?
Yeah.
We say that all the time. It's not a language, 200 words and some misspelled English words, not a language. But they could just say that's hate speech against Scots, even though you're a Scot yourself. But you may laugh at that when the police, remember a wee while back, the police were trying to get responses to say whether they should use Gaelic or Gaelic in when they go to crime scenes in wherever people spoke that language, and we were like, no, of course they shouldn't do that. It's a waste of time. Everyone speaks Gaelic, speaks English, but we were accused by certain journalists of being anti-Gaelic, right? You're like, what minute? It's not anti anything, but because of the power, people in the press of the power, they accuse that, and then things stick. And then because that's the police, imagine if the police were like really invested in that, then they'd be like, well, why? You're right. You're against these people, and it's a hate crime. So it's very insidious. It goes through all levels. We think, okay, it's misgendering, we'll have to be careful, or it's some other stuff, but it goes through all kinds of levels.
Well, that's it. And one of the big issues that I've seen is the police have said they will investigate all reports of in this hate bill with people. Now, if I fall out with you and you say, well, I'm going to get him back, I'm just going to phone the police and say,
Sure.
He said this. You're going to have the police knocking at your door, and it's, where does it go? How do you prove who said what? And if they're going to investigate it all, it just doesn't seem feasible to me that you can do that. And you've got people, and if people get arrested for this and get charged for what they say, that could affect their lives. Just being arrested can easily affect the job.
Story. Well, I was doing the research for this. A story about Scots parents tell of the horror of being reported to social services for misgendering their autistic child. And what they did was they called the child. The child wanted to they them, and they actually were using they them pronouns. But the child complained because one day basically they said, "Oh, we want to actually be called he him," because it was a girl who wanted to be known as a boy. So they were reported, and it took 9 months of their lives to sort this all out, and all through social services, all went through the police there, everyone involved. And you're like, for what? It's a family matter.
Yeah.
It's so
it can affect people's jobs. It can affect people getting mortgages. It can affect all sorts of things if you get charged with a criminal, but over what? Saying something, that's it. Just I don't know where it stops, and I don't know how it can be policed. And they'll need a lot more officers.
Don't worry, they'll police it. All right, that's what they'll be relishing to try and test out the limits of it.
Well, that's what Elizabeth Duthie is asking. How will they have time to investigate every hate crime, yet they haven't got time to investigate proper crimes?
Well, they don't even have time to investigate all the Anglophobia that's going on here as well. Where does it start? Where does it end? Sorry, as well, we could say, well, it's hate crime against the English, right? Whatever. Half of the things we see on Twitter are hate crimes against the English. It's absolutely ridiculous. What's that?
When you look at Humza's white speech,
there's that as well
in Parliament. That's a hate crime under his own legislation.
Yes, I think we have that here.
It's all getting very silly.
And actually, this is a different one. This is where he's reported to police of breaking his own hate crime law over Isla Bryson's. For misgendering Isla Bryson. But I mean, this is the question here. You just get into knots with it. Is she a man? Is he a woman? Is it a crime to say one or the other, or is it completely depending on the context that you don't know about while you're trying to talk about the person? So it just seems a trap that transfers government power to the government over the individual, puts us all in fear of saying stuff so that Humza Yousaf can lord over us. Anyway, and it's unfortunate that I think the Tories voted for, Scottish Tories were for some of this as well. So please correct me in the comments if that's the case. We're going to move on to Mary's section now, which is all about rent rises due to Patrick Harvey's nonsensical policies. If I can find a thing. Okay. Right, Mary. We're going to run a little bit long as usual, so don't rush yourself through this one.
I'll try and get through it fairly smartly.
Okay.
Basically, rents are rising fastest in Scotland due to Patrick Harvie's misguided and meddling rent controls. I know that Mark Zegveldt, you are going to be interviewing Murdo Fraser, I think, tomorrow night or very soon. He had a very good article in The Scotsman today about how Patrick Harvie, the Minister for Tenants' Rights, is actually driving up rents and making more people homeless in Scotland. Rents in the private sector in Scotland are rising faster than in any other part of the UK. So, according to the agency HomeLet, the average rental value of new tenancies in Scotland rose by 14.4% in the year to August. That's the highest leap of any region in the UK. And it's caused by Patrick Harvie when he announced a cap on rents of 3%. So basically, the effect of the rent cap on existing leases is that more landlords are just selling up, which is reducing the supply of properties and increasing the rent costs for new contracts. And Murdo says it's an easily predicted consequences of stupid acts if one has half a brain.
Yeah, you see here, there's a comment there. Someone said, that's me getting evicted as landlords simply can't sustain the tenancy.
Yeah, and that's happening everywhere. So if we just jump ahead and say that landlords have made up 12% of property sales in Scotland so far this year. That's the highest proportion since records began in 2009.
Right.
Loads of landlords are selling up, and that's just going to continue. Because they're going to be bringing in, all the damage that's been done so far, they just don't get it that if you put a cap on the rent, then people will just, when people leave a property, it means that the landlord will then really ramp the rent up. Yes. Because they have to make all the rent then. They don't know how long the tenants are going to last, and there's just so much demand is way outstripping the supply of. And
I was talking to someone today about this, or I noticed a comment about that, and basically I said, "Oh, Ross Greer hates landlords, and the Greens hate landlords," yep. And this guy said, "Yeah, that's because all landlords are scum." Well, it doesn't even actually matter if they're scum or not. I mean, imagine they were all scum, you'd still need their service. Right. Anyway, you still need to have places to rent.
There's such a shortage of social housing because they're destroying, the Greens and the SNP are destroying the social housing market as well. Yes. In the summer, there was a company, developers called Get Living, and they put a stop to, they were going to do a £200 million residential development in Glasgow, which would have provided 1,500 homes. And they stopped it due to the uncertainty about.
There's a whole load the whole load of those things, Mary. Lord Willie Haughey, he put a stop to his, I think, $1 billion development in Glasgow as well. And as I think as Paul Halford says here, SNP have not built houses.
No, they're building less and less, and they're making they're always putting in new legislation and new rules that just make it harder and harder for developers and for landlords that want to rent their properties.
It really seems to be a hate-driven policy. It's like we hate landlords and we think we're doing good by constricting the market and helping tenants, but they're actually not helping tenants at all. And they've not looked at anything beyond the hate, I don't think. And so basically we have this now inequality in the rental market where people like us, we rent. So we're in fear. Right, that a landlord says,
if our landlord wants to sell and we have to go and look for a place, rents have just really ramped up. It's, really, really expensive now. And there is such a shortage of places to rent.
That's the other part of it, because people are selling up and not renting, just too much hassle. And that's before you even start talking about the short-term let situation, Mark.
I think the issue as well is people can't, landlords are finding it harder and harder to be able to remove a tenant who, for some reason, stopped paying the rent.
Yeah,
they find it absolutely. They've seen some horrific cases in Glasgow where it's taken months and months and months. And there's a bloke, I can't remember his name, but there was a bloke who did a video of when he finally got into his apartment.
It was maybe David Griffiths, no? He did one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no, it's another one, but yeah, David's done one as well, where he's finally got in, and the state of the place,
Yes.
and they still couldn't get rid of this bloke from
Right.
From the tenancy. It's they really have made a mess of this, and it's one of the biggest areas in Scotland. One of the biggest industries in Scotland is rental housing. And they're making a complete mess of it. They really are. And it was predicted from the very start that this would happen. But Greer sits on Twitter and he laughs at people.
I know, it's shocking. It's really
He
shocking.
actually laughs at
disgusting.
people and takes the mick out of them. Now, there's a lot of people who prop up their retirement by having a second home and renting it out. And they're paying the mortgage on that home still. Now, if they can't raise their rent with the interest rates that have been going up, they're getting themselves in trouble, and they can't raise the rents to cope with it.
Yeah, so they have to sell.
There's the building upkeep of the building as well. If you can't have extra money to fix issues within the house, it's just going to go into rack and ruin the house.
Yeah,
so it's a badly thought out idea again from.
Well, it's just as I said, it's based on hate. Really, that's what it comes down to. And policies based on hate are not. It's just they're doomed to fail. And the thing is, they cause so much damage in the meantime.
This is a catastrophe, I think. But they're always bringing in new legislation for things for landlords to do as well, like they're going to make it compulsory to have an EPC rating of C or above in the next few years. So that's a whole extra level of cost. And then they're always talking about putting in heat pumps and all that type of stuff as well. So it's a catastrophe. And what we need is a dramatic change in direction.
Yes, and Grumpy Git is basically saying that it was him who you're talking about, Mark, and his flat is knee deep in dog poo.
Oh, it's disgusting.
lovely image there. So I don't know what that message is, but anyway, okay. So I see no ships. Yes, no ferries either. That's correct. All right. Okay. Thanks for that section there, Mary. There we go. Thank you for being with us tonight as we try and get through the horror show, Scottish Politics. If you can, please subscribe to the show on YouTube. And you can also buy an amazing Abolish Holyrood t-shirt. You can tell your friends about us. You can subscribe to us and just do what you can to help the show. Anything
help us along.
Makes us happy. Next, coming up, it's the moment you've all been waiting for. It is the highlight of the week. It is Zoomer of the Week.
Yeah.
All right, so mine is fairly short. It's a nutcase Lorna Slater. I'm trying for a strong start here. Okay. Anyway, as we all know, Lorna Slater screwed up the bottle deposit return scheme in multiple ways. Not talking to industry about it, not talking to ordinary people about it, not thinking about how it would actually work in practice. I mean, nobody wants to stand in a third world queue, putting their bottles in some machine after driving all the way to Tesco. It's just not on, I think, for most people, especially when there's a bin right there where we can put our bottles and stuff in for recycling. Attempt at privatising, perhaps, the refuse collection. But anyway, the big one was that by not getting UK internal market exemption, she destroyed the scheme where Alex Jack had to come in and say, nope, this is no good. He said she had effectively built a house without, and then asked for planning permission at the end. But there she is. She's still there in the Parliament trying to deny all responsibility for her actions, which have resulted in a £9 million of taxpayers' cash being wasted. Money that was given to Circularity Scotland, which is now, it's actually the circle has stopped, it seems, and for jobs that never happened and so on. Yet she continues to blame Westminster for all. Here is her on the telly.
There are not conditions under which we can launch.
So, Minister, you take no responsibility at all for that 9 million of taxpayers' money now being lost?
The scheme would have gone ahead in August of 2023 if the UK government had granted a full exclusion on the timeline that we had previously agreed.
So you take no responsibility and it's all to do with the UK government?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Right, well, you see that. It's just typical. A big boy did it and ran away. In this case, the big boy being Alistair Jack. Alistair Jack says, no, your scheme's rubbish, and so to speak. And if you actually gave him options, he said, you can do this scheme if you remove glass from it. Nope. Rather than do that, rather than make a scheme that would work and conform within UK rules, she decided to cause a constitutional issue and then blame the UK government for her own failures. And for that reason, and for just her general nutbaggery, I think is the word, then she is my Zoomer of the week.
Very good, Mark.
Thank you. It wasn't that great, but anyway. All right. No. Okay. Mary, I think, it was Mark.
No, it's
Mark,
next.
you're going to be up next. Hold on a second.
Yes.
Right, there you go.
My Zoomer of the week is Tommy Sheppard for taking he's taken the UK government to court. He went to court yesterday. I think it's been going on for the last few days over a 4-year-old internal Westminster poll, and he wants the results. And he spent thousands on doing this.
Whose money? His money.
It's crowdfunded.
Oh, right. Okay.
Thousands of pounds on taking him to court. He's gone to court over a 4-year-old internal poll that is irrelevant today. Now we have all these issues that his constituencies are going through. We have, we've talked about them tonight. We've got a cost of living crisis. We've got all these issues going on, and Tommy thinks spending thousands of pounds on a court case to get the results, and which he says is one of the most important things he's ever done in his life. He thinks
he hasn't done much then, has he?
It's so important for the rest of the UK to get this freedom of information and get the results of this, which are irrelevant today anyway. So, we've got all these issues going on, and Tommy is sat there in court.
Priorities.
Doing the world.
It says here he raised £9,110 for UK Government Secret Union polling. This is the crowdfunder here, of course, supported by the National, and we should have an investigation into its subscriber numbers and where the money's coming for to keep that thing going. But that's a slightly different issue. It seems a bit odd. It's like, okay, he gets the result, even if he wins. He loses.
It's 4-year-old polling.
Right, 4-year-old polling. Oh, so they did this 4 years ago, and
maybe we all get to go back in time, and
now it's I don't get it. It's like, okay, we won the Battle of Bannockburn. All right, okay, fine, moving on.
It just seems quite crazy to me that the court's even listening to this.
It's a good one.
Someone says, remember, Tommy loves comedy, so maybe that's what
that's what it is.
about.
Yeah. You get plenty of money from the Scottish Government during COVID, as we all know, £250,000. Keep his comedy clubs going. Well, nobody else get any money. So anyway, that's that. That was a good choice there, Mark. Next up, it's going to be Mary.
My Zoomer of the week was suggested by our good friend Marco Polo and is Colin Beattie, the ex-treasurer of the SNP, who was arrested in April, along with Peter Murrell and later Nicola Sturgeon, in connection with a police investigation into the party's finances and funding, which now includes embezzlement. So at that time, he stepped down as the SNP's treasurer, and he said, I will be stepping back from my role on the Public Audit Committee until the police investigation has concluded. So what the heck is he doing back on the Public Audit Committee this week, looking into fraud allegations over the ferry scandal? I mean, how can people have any faith in the Public Audit Committee's investigation of fraud on the
Right.
ferries when the person investigating the fraud has been arrested for fraud himself.
Only in
It's
Scotland can that
yeah,
happen.
it's a very
It's
good one.
absolutely ridiculous. So I don't know why he's decided to, go. He's
why
gone
is-
back
why-
in his own words.
Why was he even allowed to do it? This is the question.
I mean, don't they have anybody else that they could put on the committee?
That can only happen in Scotland. It
It's
really can.
absolutely
It would never happen anywhere
ridiculous.
else. I couldn't imagine that happening in Westminster.
Oh, it's
No.
just
It's
insanity.
just
It's just
quite
very
crazy.
silly. Yeah, I mean, what's going to happen? I mean, presumably they've been doing this public audit committee talking about the ferries and so on for quite some time, and then they're going to take their time publishing a report. No one's going to take the report in the least bit seriously. It's probably going to come out and say, "Oh no, there's nothing to look at here."
It's unbelievable. Actually, when you think about it, I didn't actually think about it until you explained it so clearly.
Yeah, it's like they're putting the fox in charge of the hen coop,
Oh, that's it. Okay.
the hen house.
Yeah, it's like putting someone as they say,
He's,
putting Nicola
he's
Sturgeon
been
in the committee.
arrested for fraud.
Oh.
And they're looking at embezzlement and so on, and then I know, well, maybe he is the best type of person to figure out whether there was any fraud because he knows exactly how it works.
Inside knowledge. That's it. Okay. Well, remember he has only been alleged.
He was arrested.
Arrested,
I mean, he
yes.
was arrested for those things. He
Yes.
hasn't been charged yet.
Okay.
We're
Right.
still
okay.
waiting patiently.
Okay. That's so we have Lorna Slater, Tommy Sheppard, and Colin Beattie. Mark, you can decide, and you can decide your own.
Yeah, you're allowed to choose your own.
Yours is good, I think.
Pretty difficult one to decide on this, but I've got to go with Mary's Colin Beattie.
Right, yes.
Thank
It
you.
has
Yes.
to be.
I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And no one's really picking up on the fact that he himself said that he was going to step down until such times as the police investigation was concluded. So is he thinking that the police investigation has been concluded?
That's an interesting point. But then another win for Mary in Zoomer of the week. All right. Okay, so where are we at? We are so glad to have you on the show with us every week. It's really good to see all the usual faces down there in the comments and to interact with you all. Thank you so much for giving up a little piece of your time on Wednesday evening for that as well. I'd like to thank Mary and Mark for being here tonight and leave you a thought of the week, which is becoming more and more clear. The SNP are completely out of ideas, but did they ever really have any ideas? Just had one idea, and that's been a total bust. Anyway, so with that in mind, next week it's going to be probably election talk. So we'll see you then, and it's going to be Wednesday, October the 4th. Bring a friend, and we'll see you then.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for all your comments.
Good night.
Thank you all.